Hi friends, my name is Douglas Camp and I'm a member of the San Luis Valley chapter of Trout Unlimited, and I'd like to welcome you to the Fly Tires Bench. This is video number 5, the Slant Wing Mayfly. Now, before I get started, why do I call it the Slant Wing Mayfly? Well, it could just as very well be the hair wing mayfly or the CDC wing mayfly. You might even call it the caddis wing mayfly. But I just call it the slant wing mayfly because of the direction of the wings on this beautiful little mayfly. This is like so many of the patterns that I've taught so far in this video series. It's a pattern that can be tied in lots of different sizes, and you can substitute lots of different materials for the tail, the wings, even the body material. You don't have to use standard dubbing if you don't want to. It floats very nicely because of all the hair and all of the hackle that's on the fly, and it's relatively easy to tie. And I use this fly quite a bit, almost exclusively for our bigger mayflies, the green drake duns, the slate gray drake duns, and for bigger PMDs. Here's a different version of this fly tied smaller, and you can see the CDC wing shooting back at an angle. And notice I've used micro fibbits for the tail to give this a much more delicate looking fly on the water. So I'm going to start tying this fly today, demonstrating for you, and I'm going to tie it in a really big size, a size 8 on a TMCO 100 hook. Go ahead and start tying the fly in a big size. In fact, all the flies that you tie, if you really want to perfect them at smaller sizes, always start tying them in bigger sizes. Get everything exactly right proportion-wise on the bigger sizes, the tail links, the wings, all the critical tie-in points, and then work from bigger size flies to much smaller size flies. So let me put the vise up here in position. I have already loaded this TMCO 100 size 8 hook in the vise. I'm going to use just a plain old uni-thread 6/0 brown. And for the tail, I'm going to use a fine moose hair. For the big wing material, some nice elk hair, and then 2 hackles that I have, 2 feathers, hackle feathers that I've already selected from a nice grizzly hackle and from a reddish brown hackle. You don't need any wire for this particular fly. So let's get started. I am going to start the thread right behind the eye of the hook. Clip off the extra thread, and then start working the thread back on the shank of the hook in sparse, large wraps until I get to the hook point right here. At this point, I want my thread wraps to get much closer together, so I'm creating a thread base on the hook shank. And that's so when I tie in the moose mane tail, it doesn't slide around and spin around for me. Now, when you buy materials, I've mentioned this before in other videos, try to go to the stores and touch the materials. Look at them. Ask to get the materials out of the bags and feel them, touch them, look at the links. This little piece of moose mane that I have here is very dear to me. It was given to me by someone that quit tying, and I've never been able to find moose mane quite this fine, quite this beautiful and conformed in size. So I use it for special tails. I'm going to clip off, oh, not a big thick section really by any means, about this much. And notice the under hair that's caught in the thicker guard hairs. We want to take our comb and our fingers and get that fuzziness out of those individual hairs. That can cause us a lot of trouble. So we get those out. We use our fingers to pull the rest out. We're going to use a very small size hair stacker. I have 3 different hair stackers or hair packers. I guess they're hair stackers. This very small one, a middle-sized one, and a bigger one. Put the tips in first, the thin tips. Tap the hair stacker on your desk, your leg, or whatever, until you think all those tips have fallen down to the bottom of the stacker. Turn the stacker sideways and pull it apart. And you can notice that all those tips are nicely aligned. Pull them out. Now the fat ends that you cut away from the hair hide itself, trim them up a little bit, just get them a little even. And then place those hairs, that tail section, all that hair on top. It might be a little thick, not much, but I'm going to pick out about, maybe 5 individual hairs, and then place it right back up on the top. And that looks more like what I'm trying to achieve. I'm going to put those hairs in the stacker one more time. Shake them down. Pull them apart. Now we're ready to tie in the tail. So place that moose hair right on the top. The tail on this fly, I like to be about half the length of the shank of the hook from the point right here to the eye. Maybe a little bit longer, but not much. Some people like the tails on their flies much longer. I just don't like it. Okay, place that hair right up on top of the hook shank and hold it. I'm actually going to exchange it. Put it in my left hand. Pull the thread up between my fingers and around the moose mane once, twice, 3 times, and just pull a little tight, just ever so slightly. If you pull too tight, those hairs are going to spring open like a big fan. And what we want them to do is just stay slightly open. Then start to wrap your thread wraps forward towards the eye on the shank of the hook, each time getting it a little bit tighter. You see as I tightened, those hairs flared a little bit. Wrap it up almost 2/3 of the way up. And if there's any hair still sticking out, use your sharp scissors and trim those little hairs off. They really don't get in the way, and some people even say that they make the fly even more buoyant. But I just kind of like to get them cut. Okay, so take a look at the length of the tail compared to from the point of the hook to the eye of the hook. Looks about right to me. Okay, let's wrap the thread back down, almost to where the thread ends. And now let's start dubbing. Now, dubbing is something that you can practice all your life, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. A lot of it is, are your fingers rough? A lot of it is what dubbing material you're using. Some of it is what dubbing wax you're using. Some people never know to use dubbing wax, which is what we put on the thread to make the dubbing stick to it better and compress better into a fine, yarn, let's call it. So we've got a little wax on this. Now I'm choosing not to use a man-made fiber as much as a hair fiber. I think this is a squirrel synthetic mixture. I don't really know, but I like the color green it is, so that's why I'm using it. You see, I'm just spinning a little bit on it at a time and working it between my fingers until it's very consistently wrapped around the thread. And right here at this very starting point, I don't want very much at all. I want just a little bit because I want to get this started right in behind the moose mane and then slowly start to wrap it forward, tapering it or adding dubbing to the shank of the hook so that the fly looks bigger and bigger. All right, we're going to put some more dubbing on. Most mayfly bodies are dubbed, although many people tie very fine quill body mayflies. When you tie many of the caddis patterns, the bodies are dubbed. So learning to dub material onto thread is one of those necessary evils in fly tying that all of us must at some point in time, if not master, at least gain some level of competency. Now I'm working this dubbing all the way down onto the thread so that I have even more to work with. And I'm wrapping that thread forward. Of course, I have a camera in the way. But I'm trying to increase the diameter of the fly as I work forward more and more, little by little. Now, most of our big mayflies around here in the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, they are big, chunky babies. And so if you make the body of this mayfly look pretty large, I don't think the fish are going to say no to it at all. Let's add a little more dubbing. Work it onto the thread. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to keep working this dubbing forward. Oh, probably 80% of the length from the point of the hook to the eye. Some people do not dub over this last section. They simply tie in the hackle. And I think that's a good plan too. It's just I like to have the dubbing up here underneath the hackle. The fish may see it and they may not, but that's the way I do it. Okay, working that dubbing forward. Looking pretty good. Okay, we're just going to stop it right there for right now. Maybe, well, let's add just a little bit more. Not much, just a little. Okay, much more satisfied. So you see we have this characteristic carrot-shaped body that we try to get on a lot of nymphs and a lot of mayflies especially. Now, somebody would say, well, look how fuzzy that fly is. That kind of looks more nymphy than it does dry fly. I don't think the fish sees that fly that well in moving water. It's pretty much got to be still water or slow moving spring creek or a back eddy for the fish to really look at that and say, no, that's too fuzzy. Okay, so now I go to my two hackles. Let's pull the barbules out from the base towards the tip until we get about exactly the length that we want. I'm going to measure it here. Those might be still a little bit long, so I'm going to pull them out a little bit further. The general rule is the barbules should be about 1.5 times the gap of the hook, the space between the point and the shank. I don't do quite 1.5. I do a little bit less. Now I'm going to do the same thing to my grizzly hackle. And every feather that you pull off a neck is going to be different. So you have to tailor this individually, this trimming of the barbules, until you get the right length and the right size. And notice I leave some bare stem to tie. Here we go, some bare stem to tie in these hackles, feather fibers. Okay, now I'm going to wrap this thread back down, about 1/3 of the way to the point of the hook. Then I'm going to align these two bare quills and set them on top of the body of the fly, on top of the shank of the hook, and I'm going to tie them in nice and tightly. Now, you notice that we have a lot of space up here with nothing but thread. And we have left that there deliberately so when we tie the hair wing in, we're not crowding the eye of the hook. Let's take our rotary hackle pliers and clip them onto the first hackle. It doesn't matter which one you wrap on first. And let's start wrapping it around the body of the fly once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's good. And tie it off with about 2 to 3 wraps of thread. Let go of that hackle. Now go to the grizzly. Do the same thing. Start in the same place. Now your job is to interweave the grizzly into the brown hackle so that you get a beautiful mixture of the two, and so that it's thick and bushy, because that's what allows this fly to float so well. Come up, wrap the thread around once, 2, 3 times. Okay, now we're going to take these sharp scissors, and we're going to come in from the front and start above and kind of slide the scissors down and clip the grizzly. And now the brown. Take your fingers and push those hackles back a little bit. Looks pretty good. Go ahead and push them back. Hold them back and wrap the thread forward just a little bit. Maybe not all the way to the eye. Now we have to tie in the elk hair. When you first start tying this fly, don't exceed your ability to control material. What do I mean by that? If you get too big a hunk of elk hair, it's going to be really hard to tie it in up here on the front of the hook, on that little bitty section of bare hook shank. So start with a very conservative amount of hair until you get clever at it. We're using our hair comb to comb all the underfur up from underneath the guard hairs. Or maybe, is it the guard hairs or the fuzzy stuff? You know, I need to review that. I'm not being a very good teacher, am I? Okay, so we've got all this elk hair. We're going to put the small tips in the bottom of our hair stacker. Bounce that stacker on your desk rather rapidly to get those tips to all align. Pull it out. Okay, there's the material for our hair wing. And this looks like a lot of material, so I'm gonna take about a third of it, or at least a quarter of it, and put it back in the hair stacker. That looks better. I'm going to even up the ends just a little bit. I'm not going to cut much of that hair at all. And now I'm going to change grips and go to my right hand and measure it. That hair should be about the full length of the body of the mayfly minus the tail. It's a big wing, but the mayfly that we're trying to imitate has a big wing. Okay, that looks good. Let's go back to the other hand. Let's use our fingers and push the hackle back out of the way. Wrap the thread around the hackle only once. Then come back up again and wrap it around the shank twice. Tighten, another wrap, tighter, a third wrap, tighter, a fourth wrap, and stop. Now, that process of tightening that thread is really important, and this is where a lot of people break their thread. So you'll have to learn the tensile strength of the thread that you're working with. But you can see now we have a nice slanted back wing that imitates what the mayfly displays when it's floating on the water. Now we have to get rid of all this stubby, chunky stuff in the front. And to do that, you can use a razor blade, which is a cool tool, or you can use just some great big old long scissors, which is what I prefer. See, these are much longer than the ones I was using. I pull the good stuff I want to keep with the tips back and take my scissors and come up and feel where the eye of the hook is at, which is about right there, and start to trim it. Yeah, this is the part that makes me nervous. I try to pull the hackle back so that I can't cut it with the hair. And I just trim around and cut all that bushy front hair away from the fly until I get a nice, neat looking fly. Getting there, getting closer. Now, if I had a better camera, I could show you that even though I worked very hard not to crowd the eye of the hook, the material still fall over on it. And that is kind of the nature of this fly. You don't want to cover up the eye itself, but if there are materials all around it, well, you're just going to have to push them out of the way when you tie the fly on. That's just what happens. But eventually you trim this hair down until you have a nice, small, compact head of hair. And once you get that done, then you want to take your whip finisher and go ahead and whip finish in the same spot that those original thread wraps are laid down about 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And make sure it comes down nice and tight. Cut the thread. And now it's time to do some individual work. So you take the fly out of the vise and you trim up all the little random hairs that you just couldn't get in the vise. You don't have to get all of these cut. I'm sure that there might be an old wily trot around that counts the number of hairs on a fly, but most of them will fall for this fly and make a mistake. Okay, let's do one other thing. flip the fly over, and you see how some of the hackle is kind of away from the rest of the fly. Let's just go ahead and trim some of it up too, so that everything is a little bit neater and straighter, not on just the front of the fly, but on the back of the fly as well. Looking better. There's a couple more I don't like. Let's get those right back here, shooting out the back. Now put the fly back in the vise. Give it a good look. Still trimming up some of that front hair around the eye of the hook. But I'm pretty satisfied with that. So now I'm going to take my glue and I'm going to put a nice big daub right on top of those thread wraps. Not on the bottom near the eye, but on the top. And that looks pretty good. I think that'll catch fish. So that's the slant wing mayfly tied with an elk hair wing, moose hair tail. Again, you can substitute CDC for the wing or Xylon for the tail. You can do a lot of different variations. You can do a split tail, tie it in big sizes, small sizes, and any color. All right, this is Doug Camp signing off from the Fly Tyers Bench. Hope you come to our YouTube channel for the San Luis Valley Trout Unlimited and see more videos. Bye-bye.